Welcome to the Deep Dive, brought to you by Handy Washroom Direct.
Right.
Today we're diving deep into something absolutely crucial for Ontario businesses and organizations.
Okay.
What it really means for a bathroom to be OBC compliant.
Yeah.
You've probably heard the term OBC compliant in the context of building and renovation, especially with the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, aiming for full accessibility by 2025. But what does it actually entail for a bathroom? What are we really talking about here?
Right.
Our mission today is to really unpack the Ontario Building Code requirements for commercial washrooms, understand what barrier-free and universal actually mean when you're putting these things into practice, and highlight why ensuring compliance offers some really significant positive benefits, not just for people with disabilities, but really for everybody. We'll be drawing insights from Ontario's e-laws, articles on barrier-free washrooms and the OBC, and practical guides to compliance.
Okay. Sounds good.
So first off, what does it actually mean for a commercial bathroom in Ontario to be OBC compliant?
Well, OBC compliance for commercial bathrooms basically means designing and building them to be both barrier-free and universal.
Okay.
Now, these terms often used interchangeably, but let's be clear about what they mean.
Okay.
Barrier-free means no physical barriers restricting access and use for everyone, including those using wheelchairs or with other disabilities. It's about making sure everyone can get in, move around comfortably, and use the facilities without encountering obstacles.
So that makes sense. What about universal washrooms? How does that differ or add to this idea of barrier-free?
Right, so a universal washroom is sort of a step beyond just being barrier-free. It's about being accessible to individuals and their caregivers if needed, usable by anyone at any time.
Okay.
So for example, a universal washroom might have more space to accommodate someone assisting another person or a parent with a young child.
Right.
And crucially, these aren't just suggestions. These are actual legal requirements in Ontario for both new construction and major renovations of existing buildings.
Okay, so this applies to more than just new builds.
Yep.
All right. Now let's zoom out a bit and talk about the legal context in Ontario.
Yeah.
How does OBC compliance for bathrooms fit into the bigger picture? What's the connection to the AODA that we mentioned earlier?
Right. So the OBC, which is the Ontario Building Code, is a regulation under the Building Code Act. And it sets out all the technical and administrative requirements for construction and renovation in Ontario. So essentially, it's the rule book for how things have to be built.
So the OBC is basically like the how-to manual for building.
Exactly.
So how does that connect with the AODA?
Yeah, so think of OBC compliance for bathrooms as one very important piece of the larger accessibility picture in Ontario.
Okay.
The AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, mandates accessibility standards across a whole bunch of different areas like goods, services, facilities, employment, you name it. And the goal of the AODA is to achieve full accessibility for Ontarians with disabilities by January 1st, 2025. So, ensuring that your commercial bathrooms meet those OBC standards is really a key step towards meeting your overall AODA obligations. It's not just about following building rules, it's about contributing to a more accessible province for everybody.
So it's really tied into Ontario's bigger commitment to creating a more accessible society.
Absolutely. And, it's important to remember that the AODA was created because of the recognition of the historical discrimination faced by people with disabilities. By making these spaces accessible, we're helping to right some of those wrongs and ensure that everyone can participate fully in society.
Right.
And just to be clear, while we are focusing on bathrooms today, the AODA covers a lot more than that, but bathrooms are kind of a basic fundamental part of accessibility, so they're a good place to start.
So we've got a good understanding of what OBC compliance means in principle and how it connects to the AODA. Let's dive into the specifics now. For a business owner or somebody who manages a building who wants to make sure their bathrooms are compliant, what are the key things they need to pay attention to? What are some concrete examples from the OBC?
All right, well, this is where the rubber really meets the road, and the OBC gets really specific about what needs to be done.
Okay.
So one of the most fundamental things is space and layout. An OBC-compliant bathroom needs to have enough clear floor space to allow people with disabilities, especially wheelchair users and those who might need assistance, to move around safely and comfortably. So imagine trying to navigate a tiny bathroom in a wheelchair. There needs to be enough room to turn around, to transfer from the wheelchair to the toilet, and just to move freely.
Makes sense.
In some cases, if the existing layout is just too small, businesses might even have to reconfigure stalls or even rebuild the entire bathroom from scratch to meet these space requirements.
Oh, wow.
And then, when it comes to things like the toilets themselves, the OBC is very precise. For example, Section 3.8.3.8 of the code outlines specific requirements for where the toilet needs to be located within a universal washroom.
Okay.
And depending on which configuration is chosen, there are a couple of options detailed in sentences 3.8.3.8.8.8.2b, subsequent sentences 3.8.3.8.3.8, and 3.8.3.84 dictate exactly how and where grab bars must be installed to correspond with that specific toilet placement.
Oh, wow. So the placement of the toilet actually affects where the grab bars have to go.
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting. Okay. And grab bars obviously are super important for stability and support. I know there have been some changes to the requirements over the years. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. So the current OBC standards say that you have to install these continuous L-shaped grab bars, and each arm of the L needs to be 750 millimeters long. The only exception is the area directly above the toilet tank because a continuous bar might not be physically possible there. But it's really important to note that diagonally installed grab bars are no longer permitted under the code.
Oh.
This is actually in Division B, Section 9.5.2.3.3.1. The L shape just provides a much better, more consistent grip for people who are transferring to and from the toilet, so any old diagonal bars would need to be replaced.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see how having that consistent grip will be really important.
Definitely.
Okay, moving on to sinks, or lavatories as they're sometimes called. What are the key things to consider there in terms of accessibility?
Yeah, so for lavatories, there are a few key things that are really important. First, the faucets, they have to be either lever-operated or electronically controlled. This is because they need to be operable with a closed fist, which can be really helpful for people with limited hand dexterity. Those self-closing faucets that you have to keep pushing down on the whole time can be a real challenge. Also, the OBC is very specific about the location of the faucet. The distance from the center of the faucet to the front edge of the sink or vanity can't be more than 485 millimeters.
Okay.
This ensures that the faucet is within easy reach for everybody, including people in wheelchairs.
Right, that makes sense.
Well,
And I know that even something as simple as a mirror has accessibility requirements, right?
yeah, that's right. Mirrors are another important detail.
Okay.
The OBC doesn't allow tilt mirrors anymore.
Okay.
Instead, at least one mirror above a lavatory has to have its bottom edge no more than 1,000 millimeters, which is 1 meter, from the floor.
Okay.
And it has to be at least 1,000 millimeters tall.
Right.
This just ensures that someone sitting in a wheelchair can actually see themselves properly. Now, the code does allow for inclined mirrors as another way to meet the needs of wheelchair users.
Oh, okay. So no more struggling to see yourself in a mirror that's mounted way too high. What about all the other stuff you find in bathrooms, like soap dispensers, hand dryers, that kind of thing?
Right. Yeah, so all those things, like soap dispensers, paper towel dispensers, hand dryers, they fall under the term washroom accessories in the code. And while the OBC might not give you like exact millimeter by millimeter specifications for the height of every single accessory, the general principle of barrier-free access still applies.
Okay.
Basically, they need to be reachable for someone in a wheelchair, which usually means mounting them between 700 and 1,200 millimeters from the floor, and they should be operable with one hand and without requiring a ton of force.
Okay, so you don't have to like wrestle with the soap dispenser.
Exactly.
What about doors, urinals, showers, changing rooms? Those are all covered under OBC compliance as well, right?
Absolutely. The OBC covers all those elements to make sure everything is accessible. For doors, for example, there are regulations about how wide the opening has to be to accommodate wheelchairs,
Okay.
and also requirements for the hardware on the door, like the handle, to make sure it's easy to grasp and operate. Urinals have to be mounted at a specific height so everyone can use them. And if there are showers or changing rooms, those have their own set of detailed accessibility standards too, regarding size, grab bars, seats, and clear space for moving around. The goal is to make sure every part of the bathroom is accessible.
It sounds like the OBC is incredibly comprehensive. It covers everything from the overall design of the bathroom down to these very specific details of each fixture. And I remember reading that even seemingly small things can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the little things that can really make a big difference in terms of usability. For example, the OBC requires a coat hook, and if you have a shelf, it also has to be no higher than 1,200 millimeters from the floor. These might seem like minor things, but they can really improve the experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, I guess those are things you might not think about unless you have specific accessibility needs.
Exactly. And then, depending on the type of facility and how it's used, there might be some additional things to consider as well. Like motion sensor lighting can be really helpful for a lot of people, especially in public restrooms.
Hmm.
In healthcare facilities and places like that, emergency call systems are often a requirement.
Okay.
And in places that serve a diverse population, adult changing tables are becoming more and more common, which is really great to see, although that's not necessarily a requirement in every single commercial setting.
Yeah, it's great to see that changing.
Following OBC standards, you're making your facilities usable by so many more people, including people with disabilities, seniors, families with young children, pretty much everyone.
It's about opening your doors to everybody, basically.
Exactly. Having accessible washrooms is a huge part of creating an inclusive workplace.
Okay.
When you make sure your facilities are OBC compliant, you're showing that you care about accessibility, and that can help you attract and retain a more diverse pool of talent. And, that includes people with disabilities who might not have been able to work in your business before, and that can lead to a more diverse and skilled workforce, which is ultimately better for everybody.
It's just good business sense, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
And then from a more practical standpoint, being proactive about OBC compliance can also help businesses avoid potential legal issues, right?
Absolutely. When you're compliant, you're basically reducing the risk of complaints and lawsuits, which can be very costly and disruptive.
Right.
It's much easier and cheaper to do it right the first time than have to deal with legal problems later on.
Yeah, and in today's world where people are so much more aware of social issues, I imagine that having accessible facilities can really boost a business's image too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. When you prioritize accessibility, you're sending a message that you care about inclusivity and social responsibility, and that can really resonate with customers in the wider community.
Hmm.
More and more people are choosing to support businesses that share their values, so that can be a big advantage.
And I bet it also makes good sense in terms of future-proofing your business.
That's a great point. Accessibility needs are only going to become more important over time, and building codes and standards could get even stricter.
Hmm.
So by designing and building to those standards now, you're kind of getting ahead of the curve and making sure that your facilities will be usable for years to come.
Right. It's a smart investment in the long run.
Exactly.
So it seems like ensuring OBC compliance for bathrooms isn't just about checking boxes and following rules. It's really about aligning with the bigger picture. Now, for our listeners who are business owners, property managers, or just anyone who's interested in making their bathrooms more accessible, what are some practical things they can do to get started?
Okay, well, the first thing is to really understand the requirements.
Okay.
Familiarize yourself with the Ontario Building Code Act itself, particularly the parts that deal with accessibility. You can find it online, and while it might seem a little daunting at first, it's important to really understand what's expected.
Okay.
And there are also tons of resources available online and in libraries that can help explain the code in plain language and give you some practical tips for creating universal bathrooms.
Mhm.
I'd also say pay really close attention to the specific measurements and dimensions outlined in the code.
Okay.
Things like the size of the bathroom stall, the placement of the grab bars, the height of the sink in the mirror. Those measurements are all there for a reason, and it's crucial to follow them to make sure your bathroom is truly accessible.
Okay.
And finally, this is probably the most important piece of advice I can give.
Talk to your contractors and builders about OBC and AODA compliance before you start any work on a bathroom renovation or a new construction project.
Okay.
Make sure they really understand the requirements and that they have experience building accessible spaces. Don't assume that they know what they're doing, because this is really important. Have those conversations up front and make sure you're all on the same page.
That's really good advice. It sounds like communication is key here.
Absolutely.
So as we've learned in this deep dive, ODC compliance for bathrooms is so much more than just following rules.
It is.
It's about creating spaces that are welcoming and usable for everyone, regardless of their abilities. From the big picture stuff like the overall layout of the bathroom, down to those seemingly small details like the placement of grab bars and the type of faucet you choose, it all adds up to a more inclusive and accessible experience for everyone.
Right.
And by embracing these standards, businesses and organizations aren't just meeting the legal requirements, they're actually creating a better environment for everyone, which ultimately benefits us all. For more information about accessible washroom solutions and how to ensure your facilities meet ODC standards, you can visit handywashroom.com.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive, and we'll see you next time.